Hello, I'm Eagle Gardens 1 on Instagram, and this is fucking talking shit with Eagle episode 732. Got a great guest for us tonight. Breeder Steve. Hello, how you doing, my friend? You want to tell us how you're doing, and where we can find you?
Well, I'm just feeling freshly baked, and I guess you could find me on at Breeder Steve on Instagram or breedersteve.com. Or if you're really a sucker for punishment, Breeder Steve, Breeder underscore Steve on Twitter. That's where we
Oh,
get it.
I don't know about sucker for punishment. Actually, this one was actually in demand. I've kind of trying to because of YouTube's efforts of lately of trying to take out some of the cannabis channels. You about 2 years ago, I was smart enough to kind of put together a backup channel, but now that's about as far as it went. And as of late, I thought, well, what the heck? I might as well do something with it and try to generate some traffic over there. So I've been playing replays from the past 700 episodes, and yours was just the other day, and everybody was loving it and kind of was asking for another round. So here we are. Here we are, my friend.
Thanks for having me back, man. Always a pleasure. How's the weather turning out in Michigan?
Oh, oof, it's getting cold fast up here in northern Michigan. No snow as of yet, which I'm very grateful for, but it is definitely chilly. Hanging out about 35 degrees right now where I'm at here, northern Michigan. Chilly.
Cool, yeah.
How about yourself? Where?
Well, I'm in south central BC, and it's been hot and dry, and we've had, the best fall ever for cannabis growing, but the worst fall for being a salmon because all the streams and rivers have dried up because there hasn't been any rain really, so it's mixed blessings, I guess, but the for your plants, you're happy because like there's never been full sun October like this before. So if you put out, really good quality pot, not auto flowering stuff, but really the best quality pot, then you can stand the hope of at least screening some hash with a flavor you like or something, even if the plant's not totally done. We do great light dep around here, but for the full season, it's too far north. It's 50 degrees north. So summer solstice here is about 18 and a half hours, whereas back by Detroit, it would be like 16 hours, So everything would flower so much faster in southwestern Ontario that I think it turns out about 3 weeks faster down there with the same cuts, just because it's a 42nd parallel and the plants flip into flower a lot faster. They're not in veg as long with the long days we have in BC. So BC's usually got a wet fall. So it's hit or miss, some people generally lean on early stuff, but I do some cheater outdoor for my backyard plants, and I just pull them under the back deck in a south facing backyard. So they never get rained on. So I left them out last year till November 11th, because I just want them to be super cold, pick them, hang them till they're frozen, and then make dry sift out of them. That's sort of the northern hash method.
What did you put out there? Some of your masterpiece or something you think
Oh,
about
just
working with?
mostly random things that were just new that were gifted to me, but a few I've put out repeatedly now from the same friend. This is the third year for an amnesia haze that I love that really, it's 75% Santa Marta Gold, and that's really one of my all-time favorites. And the real thing would never ever finish up here, right? So the amnesia haze is about as close as I can get. It turns out pretty good, and it's very resistant to fungus and that. But just to have it while it's growing, I absolutely love the smell of it, because when it's young, it really smells like Santa Marta Gold. By the time it's done, it's starting to get more of that Afghan influence, but still let's say mostly haze but just slightly diluted, let's say. So it's still beautiful. So I was really happy with that each year. So every time I see my friend, I say, hey, make sure you save me one more of those for next year, because I've just gotten used to having it. I like it. And another one I did a repeat from last year because I love the dry sift so much was Stropicana. And then the new ones I've got out this year, Chem Glue, Orange Creamsicle, Shish Kebaba, somebody gave me. Really nice example of peanut butter breath from the original releases of that. And a pie hoe. That's the other one, pie hoe. So the orange creamsicle, really sickly frosty and a nice, for a while it even had that orange creamsicle smell. Didn't really hold totally, but it was, you can see why somebody might think that for sure. But it really is attractive looking herb for a hash plant for screening, because it's very leafy buds. And often that's what happens as far north too, is anything starts getting leafier as the sun gets lower in the sky and further away and weaker. So you don't finish as nice. Whereas if you do the light dep in the summer, it looks like indoor. Like you can just do it beautifully because the sun's intense and it's very dry climate. So you can do dynamite light dep here. But the natural season is a struggle for high grade grass, let's say. But to me, it's still worth doing just as a hobby and for fun. You can always turn it into something that you can use, right? So it's fun. I get a kick out of it. This year I was really lazy in a way. Well, really, because I didn't want to, I wanted to see if I could grow my personal plants in the backyard only from stuff that I had. So I didn't go out and get anything. And I had some leftover bone meal and a minute amount of guano, like maybe 2 tablespoons of plant or some tiny bit left. But the bone meal I had quite a bit of, still have some left. But mainly I was using kitchen compost and filling up the pots with either chopped up cannabis stalks, which I filled entire pots with that, and then just topped them up with compost, and then topped them up with potting soil as they settled, because I had half a bale of potting soil left over, which I barely got into that half bale. But I didn't go out and buy anything for those plants. And was able, by the end they were running out. I had no more kitchen compost to use. It was all fresh stuff. There's, I'd used it all up, but I really made a point of just sort of giving myself that handicap to just see if I could grow it on like yard scraps and eggshells and banana peels and stuff. And I like to cut aloe leaves. I always grow aloe, so I can cut a lot of aloe leaves to throw into pots. And those plants just grow like really plastic green. Like they look like artificial plants. They look so healthy when they're vegging. But if you don't keep topping it up, if you're going a long season like May to November, you gotta, add some more along the way, make some teas up or something. But I was totally just, nope, you can have some more water. Actually, I think one time I realized I had Epsom salts for my hot tub. So I was like, oh, I'll give them all an Epsom salt drink, so they liked it, but that was really all they got. But still I'll have a few pounds of something to play with at least, so that'll be fun. A little flavor of this and a little flavor of that. So I really, homegrown is really the most important aspect for any region going from prohibition. First, there's got to be homegrown before anybody's allowed to make a buck. Just let us have it, for crying out loud. And yeah, then you want to, every grower I know, they would have happily signed up to the legal system if it was no more than regular sales and income tax. But if they're going to get totally gouged on every level for taxes, and fees and all this, upfront compliance costs and whatnot, they just put people off in a lot of places, so, but homegrown is sacred to me. And for me right now in Canada, that's totally enough. You know, I have some commercial projects abroad, but when I'm here, it feels like cottage country, you know, and I just back home in Canada where you might work from the cottage with your laptop or take some phone calls or something, right? But you're mostly relaxed and not having to, you know, hop in the car and go everywhere every day, you know, just stay home. Work from home has been really good. And I was doing it before the pandemic for a few years because I was kind of doing a month traveling to the farms and then 2 months home managing remotely. And so I was in the habit of doing that. So it was easy through the pandemic work-wise to carry that on. It wasn't totally easy. Like I wanted to get down and smell my crops and make selections and that. So when you're kind of limited for travel, that does suck. But I made up for it in the last year and got away a ton, and then was home for 6 months. And then the next 6 months I'll be on the road again. So I try to plan it that I'm here for the nice 6 months and then away most of the cold ones, you know.
That's the way to do it. I don't blame you a bit there.
Yeah,
You
and I
want to tell
like
me? Oh,
tropical
sorry.
herbs, you know. I love tropical herbs, and you just can't, you know, you can do them justice indoor if you're really committed, but it's not the same, you know. To grow equatorial herbs, you got to grow it on the equator. And to me, everything that's been touched with Afghanicas are compromised in the flavor department. You know what I mean? In the smell and flavor department. A lot of people, that's what they expect pot to taste like. And it certainly hasn't hurt in the potency department, but it's mainly been about the compaction, you know, of plants that'll grow on tables under lights, you know, rather than plants that shoot up like bamboo and grow pencils, right? But those are the ones that have the most exciting high notes in the flavors and aromas, you know. So to me, that's the ultimate in enjoyable cannabis that way is you know, to to really explore a lot of the flavors that come from the narrow leaf plants, you know, because to me they're underappreciated at large in the world, you know, and where they have been grown traditionally, they've suffered post-harvest so badly that they were, you know, not recognizably frosty and green. They're brown in 48 hours, right? But when you can grow them, cut them, and take them into air conditioning immediately, you can finish those plants just so gorgeous, you know, and thin plants, but they just have heavenly aromas. And you start recognizing that kind of sous-bois mulching leaf smell that the Afghans tend to impart, you know, and you get pushed out after a while, honestly. Like even Durban Poison, the whole black licorice flavors and that, I just don't love them, you know. They're, you know, I can see people do, and that's cool, you know. I have nothing against it, and I enjoy having any of these things from time to time because I love variety. But overall, the ones that, you know, that I love to see the most are really the stuff that takes, you know, 16, 18 weeks to flower, let alone, you know, 6 to 8 months from seed. But those plants are a joy to watch grow. I've seen plants grow 3 meters tall where I just put the seed in the ground and watch these tall, skinny girls come up and just special smells, you know. But you know, people aren't used to seeing that because by the time it even gets to the city, it's a brown brick, you know, and it may be full of seeds or something, right? But it just, if you can do it justice, you know, you've got some really truly exotic goods on your hands, you know. And that will, as the world's opening up, these tropicals will start being exported, I'm sure, and imported into other countries, you know. Is you just can't grow coffee in a greenhouse in Michigan and make it worth your while. You can bring coffee in from somewhere coffee grows great, you know, all year round. They grow coffee and harvest it twice. I mean, we can grow cannabis on the equator that you're harvesting daily if you want to, you know. There's a rainy season that's a, you know, bitch to deal with. And traditionally, in the spot that my primary farm is in, that is 80% of the rainfall would be in May. You know, the annual statistical rainfall, 80% of it was in May. But this year with La Nina, it's spread through, you know, it's dragged out the whole summer. They've had almost 5 months of it, probably, you know, where it just didn't stop raining. 5 months is a lot more than 1 month, you know. It's nice it fills up the reservoirs and everything, you know, because you need water to get you through the dry season. When we come into the dry season, November, December, January, February, you can finish absolutely anything outside. Because it's always 12 hours there. And in the dry season, you have problems with grass fires, not with mold, you know. But in May, you can expect to have problems with mold unless you're planting the right plants. If you're planting the right plants and cycling them well, because if you don't need to harvest them every day, maybe you just have things vegging in the fields in May, and they can suck up that water as long as it's not a field that drowns. You know, it can't be underwater, but it can be sopping wet if his seedlings coming up, and it doesn't hurt them at all. They just use the water to grow, right? So you want to plant around that rainy cycle and take advantage of it. But the things I would plant from seed in May that were, you know, native things, we wouldn't harvest them until December. You know, so they would grow all the way through the rainy season. They're still vegging, so the rain doesn't hurt them; it helps them. He's totally no irrigation, anything. They would just grow, and then by the time December comes, you know, it's bone dry and 38 degrees Celsius. It's you know, hot enough. So man, oh man, things finish up in the dry season. They're like hot dams, beautiful. But it's a great testing ground, you know. And Colombia is fantastic because you have 11 different climatic zones, so you can test up. You know, they've got mountaintop glaciers, which may be a little too high, but starting below those, you can be growing very cool climate, even greenhouse stuff. And that's where you'll see if you've got mildew resistance or not, you know, if you've got your PM genes. And if you're down in the warm spot, like in the plains where my central place is, that's very hot. It's too hot for mildew there. But you get rust clade type stuff like Pseudocercospora and Septoria, and they're more like leaf rust, right? So those, you can get different botrytis like white or gray or black, you know. And if you've got spongy type buds out in the rainy season, they'll rot. They can't do it. They can maybe do it under tops where you have cheater outdoor and you just have a roof but no walls. Then you can get away with them. But there's a lot that works even in the wettest times. So you can always work around it. But for me, I'm mainly doing selection work. So I really enjoy the different external pressures because Mother Nature culls most of them for me and makes it very easy to spot the winners, you know?
Is that the key to growing a decent sativa there, or making it time feasible? Is just throwing it straight into the dirt in that 12-12 light and
Yeah,
whatever you get,
yeah.
whatever you
You
get?
make if you've got nice, clean soil, and you put the right seeds there, man, it's amazing to watch them grow. Like they'll just take off, and to me, it's just incredible to see a plant turn into like a seed to a tree in 6 months like that, and it's just beautiful to see, you know. And I love it. I mean, to me, if the horticultural paradigm, you know, I don't mind doing the few plants here and there, or for the breeding, often you have to do that because you've got chambers and stuff to work with. So there's a lot of horticultural scale involved with the breeding operation, but the overall, the field growing and the selections in fields, to me, that's the really joyous part because nowadays we can access labs and you can do a lot and take a lot of shortcuts being able to look under the hood with, you know, marker assisted selective breeding. But the ability to do selections in fields to me is still of paramount importance. To me, that still means more than the lab, because and I'm not playing down the importance of lab work. It's really, in this day and age, you're not serious if you're not doing it, right? But the thing is, you can do lab work and have a couple of little closet rooms and stuff, but you know what? If you can't lay out 100,000 seeds in a field to look for plants and to group up different phenos and take the samples for representative studies, you're just not as solid as it could be. You've got to have test fields. If you really want to excel breeding, I think, and I know there's always exceptions to every rule, and you say so and so's done this great work in their closet. Yeah, okay. But just imagine if they took take any breeding project and give them a field to start doing seed tests in. Man, oh man, you can see those plants so good. And it's not like one's closer to the light and one's closer to the fan. There's no variation like that. It's got the field pretty homogenized, the field. The seeds, for doing the registrations, we have to do them in 3 sections of 20 plants. When I'm doing clone registrations for the government, you got to use 60 clones, and they've got to be broken up and spread between other ones. So you've got 20 here and 20 here and then 20 over here, so they can see at different sides of the field, and then they average out the numbers between them, whether it's the weights or the potencies and all that. So it's an interesting thing to be doing plant registrations that way, because you have to do them in Colombia before you can use the plants commercially, even to grow yourself. Even if it's just hemp, you've got to do characterizations, they're called. So you pay the government to watch you grow them out and take the data with you, and then they come back and weigh it, do the whole thing with you, and then you destroy it all at the end of the day. You plant these fields, and then you make your selections, and you keep some cuttings of your favorites and everything. And then at the end of the day, you still got to weigh it all and burn it for the government. You can't even donate it to the university or anything. It's just like, I hate to think how many tons of perfectly respectable grass, even excellent epic grass, that had to be destroyed, man. It's not, it's still worth doing the research and growing out your plants, but it's just such a waste to have to destroy it all, Makes me crazy.
That's insane. That is insane. And you talk about selection and lab work. Both times I've talked to you, about the million seed pop there. How's that going? And
well,
talk about lab
contributors
work.
are welcome to come down and visit the end of January this year, and we'll have the living library exhibit there. There's going to be 375 different accessions, and then large sections of many of them. Some of them will be small sections, but there'll be quite large sections of many of them. So like thousands of seeds per. So it's going to be really interesting for the people that are playing along, and bona fide researchers that want to come down and see the world of cannabis flowering at that time, because that's the middle of our dry season. So everything finishes then, right? So we've got it timed. We stagger planted, where some of them, they're new hybrids, so we're guesstimating on the finishing times, but the overall goal is that every one of them was stagger planted with the idea to flower by February 4th. So like the 2 weeks before that is when I want to have the visitors show up and check them out and see. To me, it's like a Willy Wonka weed day, where you can come in and see, like, okay, here's Asia, here's India, here's Africa, here's, the Americas, and go through it all. and see a wild amount. Only, I think I've got 2 hemps in the lot, only 2 hemps that I've worked on there. But I actually released a registered first kilo of the first hemp line I ever worked on, that I ever developed a hemp line. Not that it was something I really wanted to do, but it was just something that needed to be done at the time. So we did one anyway. But that was strange for me, let's say. The rest of them are all, of course, things that are attractive. Let's say. But there's some really nice things to see there. And there's some really good different lines of Santa Marta Gold, for example, different lines of Fundarojo, different lines of Mango Biche, which are the native things, but they're never the same from different people. There's always some variation. So I've kept them as different lines, but all of the American stuff we've brought down, or Canadian or European, and this was all like stuff that we brought 5-6 years ago, right? But at the time, it was really the top lineup of like whatever was winning all awards. We were collecting everything. So there's all really a great basis of modern stuff, as well as lots of classics, including some Shishkaberry lines and Sweet Tooth lines and a couple old things of mine, but not everything of mine by any means, but a couple things of mine. And but I'm really excited to see so many of the landrace ones all out at once, because there's South India, there's North India, there's really, really cool stuff from Middle East, from West Africa. Yeah, it's going to be a hoot. I really think anybody that comes down will never forget it,
I just have to shoot this one right to the audience right quick, and the other panel members that come on and hang out night after night. I fucking told you guys, because we talk about that shit a lot, to kind of be honest with you about what we think's going on there and what the end will be like there. And it was like a couple weeks ago we were in one of the Weed Nerd Worlds kind of talking about it. And that's what with the picture we were painting, we're like a kind of a Wonka like set,
Yeah,
where
it's
even
gonna be.
maybe
I mean, it's too bad that it's very formal. Like, I mean, it has to be very formal right now because that's the way the regs are, right? It's not a recreational setup. It's straight up medicinal research, and in this case, genetics research. But it's highly controlled. We can't sit around and roll joints and treat it like a pot festival. But for people that are genuinely interested in seeing a proper fields of all these genetics, you can make it for a day. Somehow we get by. Personal production's allowed in Colombia, so anybody's allowed 20 plants. So people around, their friends and whatnot, all have their 20 plants, or workers that have their own 20 plants at home. So when you're outside of there, it's kind of a decrim situation, but public smoking will get you an expensive fine. So it's just better not to if you're in one of the big cities, depends where you are, but this is very tiny, fairly conservative village, let's say, like there's not a stoplight there. So, I mean, you're going to stand out. And I've never smelled anybody else smoking a joint there. And I genuinely don't when I'm out and about. When I'm where I'm staying, I do, but when I'm out and about, I don't, because I just don't see anybody doing it. And they know that they were very devout Catholic area, and a lot of them are not totally into grass. There are people that are into grass, but not that many there. Like, it's not a thing there really. Like, maybe a few hours from there it is, like there's places that are villages a couple hours away near the mountains that are famous for their weed. But down in the flatlands, it's more like Texas ranchers, all cowboy dudes, you know. You go up the hill a little bit, 2 hours, you know, to where the start of the hills, and then it's more the hippie guys, you know. But it's different. Just that area, it's really something different. But I mean, I'm happy to go there. I like to go there, but it's definitely a different world. So, something to see anyway. It's part of Colombia most people wouldn't visit as tourists, you know. It's not because it's a really sketchy area, but it's just, you know, it's kind of like going to Iowa. If you're going to the States, you know, the first place you're thinking is, I'm not going to go to Iowa, you know. That's not what people are coming there for. You know what I mean? This is really like that. It's big fields and very flat, and if you're not there for agriculture, why are you there, kind of place, you know. That's about it, right? So I'm there for agriculture. My idea is to build a foundational seed selection for local production for different purposes, whether it's different cannabinoid profiles or fiber crops or whichever, but to have acclimatized seed for mechanized production, because I would like to mechanize extraction, you know, production, biomass for extraction, but doing high grade things that take a long time to finish and have amazing aromas to capture. You know, to, if you think about going after, you know, a modified combine to harvest the flowers, to cut flowers in to a chilled truck to be fresh blasted and just get them soil to oil in under an hour and get the, you know, have a big resin trap set up that you can handle tons a minute or something, right? So if you can do it, that's the area you can do it. So if I want to acclimatize seed to grow 50,000 hectare crops where you're harvesting, you know, 300 acres a day kind of thing, and you're processing 300 acres a day, and you have another seed drill planting 300 acres a day. So if you can get that cycle going, where you're, you know, you might have some interruptions if it gets super wet, but you can't get the tractors rolling in the fields when it's an absolute swamp season. You know, if it's totally wet, you got to take a break because you'll just sink in those fields no matter what you're driving. You know, but there's just so much potential to grow that way in the plains, whereas most people set up in the mountains there close to the cities and the nice restaurants and the pretty girls, and they think, you know, oh, Colombia is lovely. It's like, yeah, but you're growing on mountainsides and greenhouses, whereas where I am, if I can get growing it at the scale of sugar cane, I'm going to. You know what I mean? I want to do it like sugar cane in Brazil and really, you know, crash the world price of some of these live resins, you know, and make them to EU GMP standards so you can actually get them into the German pharmacies for dirt cheap and just totally make the patients of the world rejoice, and those that can't compete with that will not be happy. But I mean, that's the goal, is for me not to make the competitors happy, but to try and make the patients happy and get something for people that normally couldn't afford that at first world pricing. You know, they're not buying $100 grams of live resin, right? You want to make something that the poor guy can get, the homeless people can have a, you know, a cart full for not too much, you know, a couple bucks or whatever you can do it for. That would be amazing, right? So you gotta have lofty goals, you know. I don't know if I'll ever achieve it, but that's my goal. So I'm aiming to achieve that, to make silos of high grade, you know.
Shit, I love the way you dream, big brother. Yeah, I love the way you like nonchalantly just talk about some baller shit. Everything from back in the first ones where you talk about the hamburger and the fucking fish tank to nonchalantly $100,000 fee, 100,000 seed pheno hunt to soil to oil in an hour. Them are baller dreams, and I appreciate that
It's fun. It's fun to
100%.
challenge. You got to raise the bar on yourself. That's for sure. I think, if that can, surely that can be done. If you can do it at the scale of corn oil, it can be the price of corn oil, That is the hope, that you could have, haze resin, live haze resin for the price of corn oil. That'd be gorgeous. You'd be buying like peanut butter tubs of it, for $5.
How was one of your other dreams, the quest for creating a sterile female there? Is that
It's
moving
underway.
forward
Yeah,
as
it's
well?
underway. We're doing the process to quite a few actually right now. All of our favorites, we have them into production for those right now. So aiming to have those registered and released next year.
Man, you stole my next question. I was gonna ask you basically if it was just gonna have to be like a few strands that you were able to do that for with, but it sounds like you're kind of able to
I
do
can't
it
do
with
it with
multiple.
everything. I can't do them with everything, but there's not yet anyway. I haven't had success with the tropical ones. The modern ones I have no problems. But the landrace tropical stuff has thrown me for a loop on doing it. But I got something else to try. I'm hoping to overcome the challenge there, be able to do it with those as well. But right now, all the modern stuff that we've got that we like the best, of many, many things we've tried. Say we've got like between 10 and 20 that we're in the process of making them steriles. So there'll be sterile versions of themselves. And those will be
Pretty awesome.
registered, and they'll be available to licensed growers that can federally import. So like Spanish companies, Canadian companies, Australian companies, other Colombian companies. It's possible with the DEA's reclassification of hemp genetics as hemp product, as cannabis genetics are considered a hemp product, as the actual seed, or potentially even a tissue culture like a meristem or at least a calyx could contain less than the 0.3 THC, and therefore the genetic could be transported. But that's got to be looked at. But the sterile females will only be available as microcrop. They won't be seeds, because I don't get a total sterile population. The offspring are not totally sterile. I only get half. So with half of them being sterile, that's not good enough to sell the seeds as being sterile. But if I make selections of the best ones and then sell those cuttings will all be sold through our tissue culture labs. In both Spain, we have the tissue culture lab near Bilbao. So we have our genetics over there. And we have a tissue culture lab in Medellin that we work with. So we have a little one that's not operational yet down at the farm, but the one in Medellin is really a large professional one, biggest one I've ever been in, really the most amazing. And that one will have our genetics, including the sterile females. They'll be available to ship from there, but it can only be to people that can be licensed to import them. So they'll come into like a nursery in Canada, and that nursery in Canada will spread them around, and they'll be everywhere.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah. Wonderful world of tissue culture there. I think that's going to be a great thing for cannabis in multiple ways. First and foremost, I think it's going to be great for breeders in general, just to be able to keep some prenatal stock and just be able to move forward and not necessarily be locked in past projects, but be able to pull them back up and rework if they'd like.
Well, it saves a lot of space in the greenhouse and a lot of inputs and labor, as well as it keeps it preserved and healthy. It's not getting a virus from a leaf sucker that happens upon it or something. So it's really, a great thing to have all your gene bank backed up in tissue culture. It's nice to have some live plants and things too, because gives you a huge head start to take some cuts. But maybe for your entire collection, maybe you don't need everything available at once to be in your vegetative program, right? So if you can keep them in test tubes and racks in the refrigerator, that sure makes things easier. They can last a long time, not take up much space. Anyway, it's been long time coming, but it's finally happening. So that's good. You'll have to come down sometime and check it out.
I'd love to. I would absolutely love to. Um, yeah, so I with everything moving as fast as it is, and do you have anything going in Thailand, that emerging market?
Yeah. And a few years ago, quite a few years ago, actually, like 2.5 years ago or something, an old friend of mine from Switzerland who's married to a lovely Thai woman. She moved to Switzerland and lived 12 years in Lugano, which is where I know the guy from. He was one of my first friends when I moved to Lugano. And he didn't speak a word English when I met him. So, hanging out with him really forced me to use Italian while I was getting high with him all the time. So he was a super guy and is a super guy. And they moved back to Thailand like 4 years ago. And the same kind of scenario way out in the plains, except the plains there you could never mechanize because they're all these little small holding rice paddies basically. So in the dry season you can grow something into rice paddies. In the rainy season you got to grow rice. So but the thing is they started getting unseasonable rain. So any plants that were out in the rice paddies were toast, but any plants that were in greenhouses on backfill were okay. But we were doing both field trials and the greenhouses, and we started with the regular hemp license about 2.5 years ago, and made sure that even just started the planning of it then. But we'd had the 2 test runs basically in the hemp greenhouses by the time that they legalized, well, not legalized it, but descheduled it. And then it became legal to grow. We were pushing to get our research for breeding license so we could have high THC plants there as well as hemp plants, which were kind of our dry runs. And we were hoping to get that license, and it was about a month or two before the royal decree was released, and everybody knew that it was coming. It was already in the Gazette. So it was like 90 days in the Gazette or something. I can't remember exactly, but it was up in June that it was official, and they descheduled the plant. So the guy was telling us, he just said, the inspector said, don't worry about it. Just plant what you want because I'm going to be out of a job when this new thing comes. There's not going to be any inspectors, or it's just going to let everybody grow. So it's we still have the license, but we don't need. It's only a hemp license, but you don't even need it to grow weed anyway. You just need to declare on this app where you are. But we're keeping the company and the license and trying to expand it, trying to get paperwork for everything. But as it is now, you can literally just plant whatever you want. So that's but my friend is very cautious, and even though it's the Wild West and there's an endless market for kilos right now, I mean they're starting to get flooded, especially at the low end. But the high end's never totally flooded. The low end and the mids get flooded, right? But the truly top grade isn't always flooded. That's always there's always room at the top, I think. And anyway, even there's a very lucrative market for scents there right now, and it's totally just wide open. It's beautiful, but my friend said, we started this to make a seed project and to do seed breeding. Let's not get distracted in growing a whole lot of sensimedia in case there's problems later about it, even though right now it's, to the letter of the law, as long as you're not, selling it as a joint or making it into extracts. Extracts, you need a processing license and you have to sell to pharmacies or something or make formulas out of it, pharmaceutical stuff. But straight flower or whole plant leaves or whatever, they can go, you could sell a pound to the restaurant can crumble some up on every dish if they want, or it's wide open, and they are selling it pre-rolled. But the beautiful thing to see is like the grandma and grandpa at the side of the road with 200 knee-high plants just selling them beside the traffic jam, like oranges in LA or something, right? Like you just see these people out selling plants at the side of the road. I love it. To me, that's inclusive. There's the only social equity really is going to be if they just let everybody play. If they start stacking barriers to entry, then it's, just there's going to be some token amount of inclusivity there, but overall it's going to get swallowed up like every other industry, by the big pockets generally. There's that's overly cynical though, because when you look at like wineries, there are huge wine companies that are easily the biggest players, but there's still an enormous amount comes from all these small wineries, and that's there'll always be room for everybody if they're really good at their niche, So if your niche is the mechanized agriculture or your niche is 5-gram nitro line tins that are just ultra premium bud, that's cool, by all means, go for it. I'm happy to have projects doing, trying to grow the absolute ultra premium to put in cans so it gets there just the way it left the farm when the people get it. It's not squished. We can do mail order direct. Like in Thailand, people are selling on Facebook and on Twitter, and they're not illegal to do it. The Thai plugs are allowed to be Thai plugs. Everybody's allowed to grow and sell weed there. There's no dispensary license. People just open a shop, or they do it like the food trucks. You see like dispensary food trucks that they open the thing up, they got a counter there, and they'll weigh out your purchase for you, and they're parked right between the food trucks. So it's really just overnight. It happened in June. It was overnight. Right now Thailand's getting just slammed with monsoon time right now. They got huge floods over there, so I do feel bad. Like a lot of Thailand is flooded. But as far as the change in the cannabis law there, it was so apparent that they didn't just copy other places. They didn't say, oh, we're going to do it like Canada. They looked at Canada and said, geez, we got to avoid doing this, this, and this, because they sure that up in Canada, right? So they picked and choose a little bit, but overall they said, the most fair thing to do and the most open thing is just to let everybody do it. So they make them download this app, and then you drop a pin in your garden and say how many plants you have, basically, So, and then they expect you as honor system to collect sales tax on that and then pay income tax on it. But every household's encouraged to participate. They were even giving away plants. They had something that they were going to give away 1 million plants. So I have no idea what they were. And one Thai researcher cracked me up because we've had a little to do with one of the universities there. And this one Thai researcher, they have a greenhouse on the roof at the university with the license for the THC plants, because only the universities were getting the THC licenses. And the funny thing is this guy, he'd grown out, some modern stuff, but he'd also been growing out different regional Thai things. And he was like, I've come to a conclusion about our Thai cannabis. And it's like, what? It's not very good. because it's so much hermaphrodites, and it's when he puts that up against the latest and greatest thing from the West Coast, and he's just like, okay, well, duh. But they had, even starting, I don't know, 5 years ago or something, the king instructed researchers to develop the Royal Four for the type. There's 4 types of cannabis, the type 1 through 4, and he wanted the Thai Royal Four. So he had them breed it, and they have these Royal Thai strains, and that was strains. You're not allowed to say strains, remember. There's only strains of viruses, and this is just etymologically correct. But we may see different cultivars or different accessions of seeds or different lines of seeds, but we got to stop saying strains. It's a bad habit. It's something that's so ingrained because we've done it so long. But the fact is, it's not botanically correct. There's only strains of viroids, viruses, whatever you want to call them.
That's a true statement, though. I mean, I guess we have to move forward at some point. So I guess you're right. You're right. You should probably push on with that.
It's not just me. There's getting to be others that are demanding accuracy. No one's demanding it. It'll never go away. I will be hearing strains of cannabis until I am pushing daisies and then some. But there's no strains of cannabis.
I actually seen a thing on a Vice on Thailand that because you mentioned them using it in the restaurants, just crumbling it up. They were actually in that special talking about the root. There was I don't want to embarrass myself saying what it was, some type of acid, I believe, that it produced, started with a G, but they kind of sauteed it a little bit, and they said that was like the magic ingredient in all their meals. It didn't necessarily bring a high to it, but it just made all the other ingredients stand out. It was like a super ingredient, and they did blind tests during the episode,
Well,
and
send me a
everybody
link, and
always
next time I'm
choose.
there, I'll go try it.
Please do let
If
us
you
know
can,
how
yeah,
it.
if you can find the place, let me know, and I will go try it. I'll be
Right
going
on.
back this winter.
I will look that up. But yeah, it is a pretty amazing plant. There's really nothing to throw away on it. Even for, creams and stuff like that, there's stuff to be found in the roots.
Well, even
Anti-inflammatory.
throughout Southeast Asia, cannabis leaves, for literally thousands of years have been a key ingredient in the soup. Like they just wouldn't think of making chicken soup without it, kind of thing. It's like oregano on your pizza or something. It's gotta. They just felt that it was a culinary affront that they'd had to remove this from their cuisine for the time of prohibition, and that was one of their key points putting it back. Is this is a traditional ingredient in our food, and it should return to the kitchen, and they want people to cook with it, or restaurants to cook with it, because it's healthy. I'm down with that. I
You
was there
know, it,
just before they descheduled it, so it was still illegal, but everybody knew it was about to be essentially legal, not officially legal, but de facto legal, let's say, which is ultimately a great place to be. And a lot of people say, oh, you have to have legal so that you can have tested. And it's true, people can get sick from crappy weed that's been sprayed with fungicide. And I've seen it in Thailand and in Colombia, where people that are they try and cross the native stuff with the new stuff. In Colombia, they call it creepy or crippy, but the creepy they call it. the but they often aren't acclimatized, right? So they're not acclimatized. So they make these new hybrids in one-off, and then everything they're growing starts rotting. So they start spraying it with fungicides, and then they start extracting it into carts, and then people start getting sick all over the city. And these are prohibition nightmare tales. But as long as it's descheduled, then any savvy brand can use third-party testing and have their product verified clean. And if you're content just buying it from, Rasta Johnny at the farmer's market that you've always seen and he's always given you clean pot, don't make Rasta Johnny go get a test. It doesn't matter. Just leave it alone. If you can make it a crime for people to sell it tainted with systemic fungicides or pesticides, by all means, but don't force everybody to get testing. You don't have to mandate testing. People, producers will do it to gain the confidence of consumers, and consumers that are confident with their local farmer, they're happy to get with them. Most people aren't going to spray crap on their weed, and they will be out of business and in trouble so fast if they do, that why risk it, Anyway, I think it's a very unfortunate for all the people that have got sick, because it's really been magnified with extracts. People were smoking fungicide laden weed for a long time, or Avid sprayed on them, or crap like this, right? So there's been systemic poison in black market weed for a long time. It's also in all kinds of other products, but why not make that shit illegal and not the weed? Hey, why not just make the poisons illegal? Anyway, whatever. Even Avid, I remember when we had a grocery store, we wouldn't sell it, but most grocery stores did, and they smuggled it up from Washington State because it was illegal in BC. But it worked for spider mites as systemic pesticide, so people sprayed it, and I'm sure it wasn't good for people that were smoking that shit. But once you start turning that into shatter and stuff, then it's 10 times more concentrated all of a sudden. So even if that little bit of pesticide wasn't totally making you sick, now it is, So people were, I was talking to somebody this week in the Lower Mainland that was buying black market shatter and got sick, and then had the product tested and his blood tested and found the residual pesticides. I mean, just nasty. But so they say, yeah, you've got to buy tested stuff. Okay, but you shouldn't need a license to go get it tested. They should just let everybody get it tested, And if people aren't gonna, to me, that's still between them and their consumer. And if they have a level of trust that they don't need it, like I've got friends that I would trust to give me clean cannabis that I know because I know they consume it themselves and they would have no interest in putting that crap on it, So I mean, that's fine. But for me here, I'm a homegrown guy, and that's just enough joy for me when I'm in Canada right now. So that's team homegrown. Yeah.
Right on. I think everybody watching will agree with that 100%. And then I'm glad to hear you say that, because I was wondering as we were talking there, and if you were focusing more on the like legal production side of things, more commercial production versus, catering to the home grow.
Well, the Colombian project was set out. I always knew that it had to start as a seed selection project to enable the registration of clones, to enable the breeding of new lines, to form the foundation of production for that area. But I had some problem partners off the get-go that kept underestimating the importance of the selection process and just kept wanting to push into production with the first, hemp that they brought down. And they say, you can't grow that here as is. You have to acclimatize it. But no, they'd press ahead and plant fields, and then it would be garbage, and it would just drive me nuts. So I was butting heads with some non-growing partners that were delusional about how this was going to work. And it took me years, but I got rid of them 2 years ago. And since then, I have got a much better team in place at the top. And now we've made progress in seed the last 2 years. And now we're ready to do the pilot plant for extraction and that before we start building the full-on industrial scale, right? So you got to walk before you can run with it. But first, if you don't have the right seeds, it doesn't matter how great extraction plant you get. But for building a live resin factory, you want to do it somewhere you've got to harvest all year round. I don't want to spend a huge fortune building a state-of-the-art EU GMP live resin factory, something that doesn't exist yet, and build that where you get one crop a year. Why? We've got to build that where we can crop all year. That's the key, So to me, that's the key, is once I have the right plants in that area, and I've got lots of good candidates now, and particularly the sterile versions of them, then that'll really help too. If you're in oil production and you don't want seeds out there, we'll make field seed as well, because the only way you're going to really sow those fields is with seed. So if they're steriles, that would be with artificial seed, and direct sowing in the field with those is iffy at best. With desiccated ones, you may stand a chance, but that totally remains to be seen how you can do that, if what rate of success you have with it, let's put it that way. So essentially you're looking at planting a whole lot of feminized seed, but you need silos of seed, the same as you'd have silos of corn or wheat. You need silos of hemp seed for that matter, but you need silos of high grade cannabis that's built for the equator. And man, oh man, then you'd be unstoppable. You'd be taking that down, really just mowing it down. That's the idea for there. So I go from, growing some plants in pots on my back porch to, growing tons on the field. So I'm happy, I've got things in different scales in between, small greenhouses or smaller fields in Thailand. And it's fun doing it at every scale, really. I've got away from indoor a lot in the last long time. I really haven't had a real indoor operation going since like 2002, maybe. So 20 years, literally 20 years ago. I had like a couple of seed in containers under light, but like two rounds of seed in containers under lights down at the farm there. But that was while I was building these clear topped breeding chambers, so they get the 12 hours natural sunshine but no lights. So those are operational now, so we got rid of those containers. But I had literally like 2,000 watt lights, I think, making a few batches of seed. No, there was 4. There was 2 in one spot, 2 in another. But yeah, but hardly anything, and that was just like 1 or 2 rounds. But it made a few little seed rooms. But now we've got 18 breeding chambers, and those 18 breeding chambers have clear natural light, and then aircon and dehumidifiers in them, and they're all white inside. They look awesome, and they have they're about 3 by 6 meters roughly, so it's kind of like 10 by 20 feet. And yeah, it's wicked. And when you make the batch in there, so you have 1 pollination per room, but then you can have, so you got 18 pollinations happening, but you might have 10 or 20 receiving plants in each room, and then when you've got all of these different hybrids to look at, then you can go and put them all in lines in the field and compare all these blocks. So it's really, that was the dream come true, and that is where we are now. So we've done that for the last year. So that's been happening for a year already. And then going forward, it's just going to be further into the best lines. The first ones, you put them out there and you see how everything goes. And then you say, okay, from these 375 lines, let's work with these 12, you know? And you keep get to narrow it down that way, or maybe 20 or maybe 10. Just how excited with them are you, you know? But pretty much everything that's made the cut to get in there has already been through a very rigorous selection process. So there's not a lot of dogs in the mix, you know, there's a lot of beautiful things in there. So I'm really, really excited to see all the future generations of the lines we've been, because I've been doing selection crops the whole time I've been down there, but it didn't have the breeding license until last year. So we could get research crops to do selections, but we couldn't officially, even when we registered the plants we select, we could do that, but we couldn't start crossing them because we didn't have this other damn license. Because my guys were like, oh, what do you need that for? Just use the ones you got. I'm like, oh, no, these aren't the right ones, you know? Anyway, it's so much of a relief to be back at it and breeding on a serious scale again. And I'm having a lot of fun to get that happening. I mean, I'm really excited to have some seeds released after this long. You know, it's been nearly 20 years, or basically 20 years since the last real spice came out. And there's a lot of people on my case to see returns of the old things, but also of new things, you know. So I've been working on a bit of both, and I'm excited to bring some things back out, you know. So yeah, it's been too long, and you know, there's been often imitated, seldom equaled, you know. And I see so many of these knockoffs out there, and that just, I've been cringing for a long time. So it's, you know, I got to set shit straight and put out a couple of proper shishkaberry and proper sweet tooth, you know. It'll be so fun to have some, and I've got some different lines of each, including an auto. I've never done autos really. I was never into autos, but I found one sweet tooth I absolutely fell in love with. It was an auto one, and I kept that out of the regular sweet tooth breeding, but I kept that auto line separate because it smells like where grape lollipops are born. Like if you were stirring a vat of the liquid grape lollipop, it's just absolute candy, super frosty, flowers on 24 hours. You know, you can't stop the thing. So there's no keeping mothers of it, but I did find a matching male of it. So I was able to save some seed. But that would be a neat one to put out, because I think there's a lot of people are into autos, because a lot of people live somewhere where they've got a very short season and the autos are great for them, you know. But largely I didn't like them in the past. I know they've come a long way, but you know, when they started coming out, they were really that kind of ruderellus onion and hay and carrot, and there's just nothing nice about it. It's like, I'd almost rather not have weed than have weed like that, you know. And that's harsh, you know. But the autos are better now than they used to be.
You honestly look and sound excited about what you're doing. That's
Oh, yeah.
for real.
That's the only reason to do it, man. If you're not excited about what you're doing, start doing what you're excited to do, you know, because life is too short. And if you're doing what you love, you know, it's the old chestnut cliche about, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. You know? And there's a lot of truth to that. And the thing is, you know, I was always told when I was young, if you do what you love, you'll be successful at it, you know. And to a large degree, that's true, you know. And it's easy to, you know, obsess about something you're into, so it doesn't feel like work. Like I might do research 18 hours a day, but I don't feel like I'm working 18 hours a day. I'm just reading up on something I'm interested in, you know. Whereas if you're just at a job going, oh my God, I've got to learn this thing, well, it's not the same. You're not inspired to do it, but when you're into it and you're seeing new study comes out about this or that, and you're interested to follow along. And I find, like most things, the rabbit hole just gets deeper the further in you go. You just realize how much more you'd like to know. And unfortunately, now, in this day and age, we have the ability to sell our desires in this way, like if you can dream of good research study and you can put the project together, you can do it. At least the cops aren't going to kick in the door, So, I mean, before you could do it, but the cops may or may not kick in the door. Now I get EU funding. I've written the design brief to get R&D grants from the EU for doing cannabis genetics research. So I'm literally getting EU funding to breed cannabis in Spain. And if you told me that 20 years ago, I would have been like, yeah, I fucking hope so one day. That would be brilliant. That would be awesome. But at the time, it seemed kind of laughable. And even today, most Spaniards would be surprised, like, you what? You're getting EU funding to run this breeding project? But as long as you've got a compelling argument for doing it and what the point of the research is and how it's a benefit. And the main thing with these R&D grants in the EU is every region, there's lots of these regions, autonomous regions or semi-autonomous regions, let's say. And each of these areas, like let's say provinces or states, basically, they each get opportunity to apply for R&D funding grants. If they don't apply, they don't get them, but if they apply to get, employ 10 doctors to set up preclinical and clinical trials on your skin formula against eczema, well, that's 10 nice jobs coming into our town, and there's going to be lots of spin-off from that. So they see the upside in helping these projects develop. So you get help at the municipal level, basically, and there's something above that. But I don't know if it's like a county or something. But I don't know the American names for the Spanish districts. But the fact is, if you can do it professionally and intelligently, you can make your dreams come true. Even the most far-fetched things like this, where you think, you told me in high school, I will be able to grow fields and do open breeding in Colombia. I'd be like, well, I sure hope so, or in Thailand. I say, yeah, but it was looking pretty unlikely back then, like it was, nobody was holding their breath. Let's put it that way. We all knew that's what would be beautiful if we could do that. But it was like, Thailand was not kind to people growing fields of grass. They let 4,000 people out on one day in June. 4,000 people out of prison for grass. So that was, such an amazing thing to see happen in one day, But the rest of the world's got to, play catch up. These guys are setting an example, and they're not looking at the screwed up. They're looking at the screwed up versions in America or Canada or Australia, and they're going, we don't need to copy any of these crazy people. We're going to make a Thai thing for Thai people, and recognize that it's a traditional herb in our medicine. It's a traditional herb in our kitchens. We're going to just deschedule it. Well, you can't get much easier than that. They want to talk about, oh, we got to do the science. Oh, you know what? Show us the science from when they made it illegal. Where was the science for that? Let's just go back to before you made it illegal. And then if you want to start thinking about regs, that's on you. But to start with, at least remove the problem. You put the problem there with no good reason, with terrible reasons, and it's just gone on too long. The century of prohibition has got to come to an end. It has been way too long, and so many people have, paid a terrible price for it, but cannabis has never been more popular. It's never been more available. It's not going anywhere. The horse has left the barn. These countries can say, oh yeah, we're still going to prohibit it. You know what? You're not. You're going to fall hard on this one because the world is turning, whether it's a globular world or a spherical world or a round disc of a world, it is turning. And at some point we're going to wake up and it's going to be legal everywhere, or at least descheduled, because start there, just deschedule it. And then if you want to start layering in your headaches, by all means, but to start with, you just got to deschedule it. That's what the ties did. They said, we're going to deschedule it first, and then we're going to see what needs to be done, So they descheduled it in June. So we're going to make regs, but we're just going to let it be first. And then we're going to see what we need for regs. That's a pretty smart approach, rather than like, we're going to create this artificial market and then we're going to scratch our heads when nobody wants to buy weed that's taxed at $5 a gram or whatever. It's too much, and people won't buy into that. You've got to just normalize it, make it boring, like buying cilantro in the market. That's all it needs to be. If somebody wants to buy it like that, fine. If somebody else wants to go and buy it third party tested in a pharmacy made to GMP standards, somebody will be happy to oblige those people. You can get anywhere in between. Like, you should be at least able to buy a pack of pre-rolls anywhere you can buy cigarettes, at least. Why should cigarettes be 1,000 times more available than pre-rolls and taxed punitively to make them impossible to sell at the same price? Because there's no reason you couldn't sell, some bud at that price. There's got to be, the hippie hay market.
Even with cigarettes, so look how long it took them to kind of open the market up to the roll your own type thing. You know what I
They don't
mean?
encourage the little guys, that's for sure. I mean, it's definitely a cartel of cigarette production, and that's the logical outcome of regulators. When the market's controlled by regulators, the first things to be bought and sold are the regulators. And that's I didn't make it up. This is a known thing. The regulatory capture is very real, whether it's overtly corrupt or just too cozy. It's a real thing. And the regulators have no place in a lot of things they get involved in. Really, they can't decide better for people than people can decide for themselves, by and large. So the market will pick the winners better than anybody. And if they make barriers to entry and limited license states and garbage like that, like in Florida, where you just have a handful of producers that have a captive market, they're not even allowed to grow their own. It's like saying there's only 6 restaurants you can eat in and you can't cook at home. Well, fuck that. There's a lot more than 6 restaurants, and I reserve the right to cook at home, so they got to be rational. If they're not rational, people won't respect them anyway. They won't have solved any of the headaches. Any of the prohibition problems will still be problems because there's still ways to charge people. Like in Canada, when the Cannabis Act came out and we legalized cannabis, we got a lift on a lot of places in that I'm allowed to have a few plants, 4 plants. Not every province even allows the personal production. Only some provinces allow it. It's not federally legal homegrown. So like in Manitoba or Quebec, I believe you can't grow your own. Maybe some other province, I'm not sure. But it's not totally nationally legal that way, Whereas if there's some parts of the country you can't have homegrown, then it's not done yet, The Cannabis Act made way more ways to get charged. There was like, I forget how many more. It went from like 6 offenses to 36 offenses or something like that. Like there's way more ways to get charged with cannabis now that it's legal. So you've got to be careful what you wish for, because deschedule is the great start. That's the place to start, where you just say, hey, leave it alone. It's bloody oregano or echinacea. Like echinacea affects it has compounds that affect your cannabinoid receptors, it tickles the same buttons, the thing is, it's a medicinal herb, right? People talk about echinacea, like, oh, it's a medicinal herb. Do you need a license to grow echinacea? Do you need a license to sell echinacea? Is there a fucking dollar a gram tax on it, plus sale tax, plus municipal tax, plus, like, come on, it's echinacea, people, get used to it. It's a bloody simple herb and it's delicious, and people like to make tea out of it. Some people like to smoke it, as you will. Like, you look up an ounce of mullein. If you grow mullein in a field, you're not harvesting any different weight really than if you were growing cannabis in a field. Like, you see mullein grow, right? It's got those long colas with the yellow flowers and the fuzzy leaves. Well, people smoke mullein. It's a good expectorant, and for asthma, it really opens your lungs up, right? So mullein is like $6 an ounce, and it's comparable. If you could grow either one of them with no licenses and huge cost and barrier to entry, then it could really be grown like mullein, and people, if ounces of decent, I'm not saying that's going to be the best ounce in the world, but a respectable ounce outdoor, respectable ounce for $5-6. Come on, what does the market look like after that? Let go to the farm stand, get your your dozen cobs of corn for $2, and $5 you get another ounce. They just leave the little box there for you to put the money in. You just have those little honors. You remember in the cornfields, do they still do that? Where you drive by the cornfield, they'd have like, self-serve corn sales. You just go pick up your corn and put $2 in the box. Probably more now, but I remember doing it as a youngster. But it could be that easy, They just can't even imagine that because they think people would steal it. I was like, you know what? They could walk and just take the corn, but they're gonna go drop the $2 in because most people are decent people. That's the fact of the matter. Most people are decent people, and when weed is worth $5 an ounce, how many people are going to be trying to rip you off for your 4-ounce plant? Nobody can be bothered. You know, I'm not saying for $5 an ounce is trimmed. It might be a damn bud on a stick or two colas just hanging there. You take it home, rip the leaves off it, your problem. The trimming adds a whole other layer.
I kind of proposed a question the other night that do you think once it does become like that, where there is, a commercial cannabis, where there is, large scale farming, do you think it will get to the point where they won't let it get like that? You know what I mean? They'll start price fixing cannabis. You know what I mean? They don't give two shits about the little guy and the dropping prices now, but when it comes to the big boys putting in, they're not going to want to see the bottom fall out. They're not going to want to see that $5 an ounce. They're
Well,
going to be like, whoa, whoa,
they'll
whoa, whoa,
be
whoa. That's
the bigger players are used to making on thin margins because they're used to a volume business, right? So a $5 ounce is not a big deal if you've got 500 million ounces, right? So it's all relative, right? So if you can do it on a 10-cent an ounce profit, but you have enough ounces that works, and just make that like the smallest unit. Like, don't have grams of weed. That's just silly. Make the ounce the small thing, Make the ounce the new gram. And then if people want to buy a $25 ounce or a $50 ounce, that's fine. Somebody else will sell them that. But there's got to be a decent $5 ounce for the average people, It's why not?
think everybody in chat just went yay when you went to announce the new gram.
Yeah. A gram, like what's a gram is so small. It's like that's one joint. Why would you buy one joint? Like for fuck's sakes, you at least get a sack. You need a little sack at least, right? I think a $5 to $10 ounce would be and even in Canada right now, I think the low end that they're getting for outdoor is to the grower, I think, is about $12 or $13 an ounce. And then that might retail for $60 or something, after tax in the store. Or maybe more, $70. I don't know, but I just don't know exactly. But I know that's the ballpark. Retailing for under 100, and the grower getting like 12, $13 Canadian, which is $10 US an ounce to the grower. But the growers aren't allowed to sell direct. So if you could buy direct from the grower, and this is starting to happen, they're starting to let in BC now. They're going to do it. They did it. Kind of in Ontario, but they had to sell it to the government and then buy it back to sell in their own stores. Whereas in BC, I don't know if they're going to do that same or not. But it's got to be more like the small wineries where, if it's a land-based product, there's only sales tax on it. There's no excise tax because it's grown here. For the craft brewers, it's not the same because they buy their grain from Alberta to make their beer. So it's not grown in the province, whereas the grapes are. So the wine, there's no excise. If it's domestic, if it's locally produced wine and you sell it out of your own shop as a small winery, there's no excise tax. There's just regular sales tax. But if you're a brewer and you're bringing stuff in from other provinces and fermenting that and selling it, then they charge them excise tax on it. And it's the same if I brought in grapes from Washington State and made those into wine, I would have to pay excise on that. And that would change my license from being a land-based winery to being a commercial one, which is a whole other set of rules and regulations, right? And tax levels, of course. But the parallels I thought were really important to look at how the wine industry was, because there's a pretty strong local wine industry in BC, and it just made sense. They could have even piggybacked. There's no reason why they can't still allow a winery to be both. You could have a tasting room with wine on one side and your tasting room with weed on the other, and you could have them both growing in the vineyard. Honestly, I used to have some plants in my vineyard, and I think in most of the vineyards there's a lot of plants, not that many because it's not their focus, but it's maybe what the cellar hands are smoking all winter. So I mean, there's so much overlap, and they're already geared towards just serving adults, and they already have the same tour buses coming. A lot of the tour buses here that they say wine and weed tours on them. There's a whole bunch now in my town, and they drive around these vans that say wine and weed tours, and they alternate. They take you to some dispensaries, and then they take you to some winery, and you somewhere nice to go smoke a joint and drink a bottle of wine, and then they take you to another winery. So there's, it's becoming more and more culturally acceptable and more visible. Let's say in BC has been culturally acceptable for, you know, 50 years easy, 60 years. It's not a new thing. BC was a pot friendly culture since the 60s by and large. I mean, there was hassles with people, but by the 90s, it was really the cat out of the bag that as far as Canada went, BC was the most permissive place, and they were just giving fines. By like the mid 90s, they were just giving fines and not jail time. It was the only province in Canada with nobody in jail for growing when I moved here, which was why I moved there. Well, that's a pretty good, that's as good as we're getting at that point, that was as good as it got right then. And after 5 years in BC, that was when I was invited on a consulting gig to Switzerland, and then saw how wide open it was there, and it had never been made illegal. The use of it had been made illegal. So there was no hash bars, and smoking it in public was illegal in that. But there was shops selling pot everywhere. And they just say, well, you're allowed to grow any plant you want. Swiss Botanicals is big business. We're not going to start making plants illegal. but we can say it's not Amsterdam, there's no hash bars. But if people want to buy the herb and put a kilo in their closet because they like the way it makes their sweaters smell, perfectly acceptable, you know? So there was just them going like that to the neighbors who were not so keen on it, like the French and the Germans, the Italians and the Austrians. They'd say, okay, yeah, they say, we're not Amsterdam, we're not Amsterdam. But they knew the Swiss would let their kids go and grow 10 acres on grandpa's farm in the summer. And then, you know, those university students would sell it to all their friends from Italy, France, Germany, Austria, and those guys would take it back to their countries and take all the risk to sell it. But they would show up in Switzerland with piles of money, you know. And the Swiss know how to attract money. They like to attract money, so they have very flexible ethics that way. Like if you were a dictator of some back asswards little country somewhere, you could load up a 747 with pallets of gold, whatever you wanted, land in Switzerland, and you can bring any amount of currency or any amount of bullion or diamonds. There's no limit on what you can bring in. And that's because they want you to bring all that in. And they know there's a very high probability that as a dictator, you're probably going to die and nobody's ever going to find these numbered accounts. And after a while, it's just theirs, you know? So they stay neutral to play both sides of everything, right? So they're ultimately flexible as long as there's something in it for them, and they recognize a good thing when they see it. So they're very opportunistic, and I respect that about them. They really were, you know, just letting it hang out there as long as they could, and yeah, that's a whole other story. Yeah. And I've been talking your poor ear off long enough tonight, probably.
That's up to you, my friend. I'm good. I could keep you going for hours. Your schedule is tighter than mine for sure.
Well, it's not too late here. I tend to start my days pretty early. I usually, you know, wake up around 5 and get up by 6. But I've, you know, checked all my messages before I get up and stuff. Usually do some thumb work from bed when I wake up, and then get up and have coffee around 6, and then get on calls by 6:30 or 7. Because everybody I'm working with, whether they're in Spain or the UK or Colombia or Thailand, Thailand is 15 hours ahead, right? So everybody's ahead of me though. I'm in the very last time zone as far as where any of my projects are, right? So they start 15 hours ahead in Thailand, and then Spain, UK, and Colombia is not so different, but it's 2 hours different now, and then 3 after daylight savings. But I don't have to work every day with all of them, but every day I talk to some of them, you know. So it's and I love to see what's going on. I'm happy when my staff shares, you know, pictures or videos with me of what's happening at the farm. Often it's troubleshooting something where, you know, there's less and less of that as you had the same farm for a while and the same people, and you're keeping good records. You know, after 6 years, you know, it's starting to get kind of routine. There's always challenges, there's always things that pop up, but overall, you have a pretty good grip on it after you've been revising your SOPs twice a year for 6 years, you know? So any, you know, professionally run place. And this is why it's great to employ agronomists that have experience in preparing good reports and that. So you're getting grow reports. It's not like, you know, I was pretty slack doing it. I kept a lot in my head when I was young. You know, I didn't keep as good a records as I could. And I have a pretty good memory, but boy, I'm starting to notice it slipping and slipping the older I get. And now it's really important to me to keep a lot of records, and but I have staff that's really well trained to do that. So I get to see all this data without having to actually manufacture all the data, let's say. So it's really been beautiful. I have to jump through other hoops to make all that happen, you know. And I get dragged into more. I really do my best to stay out of finance. I'll take on partners that are more equipped to deal with those matters. but I do end up getting involved in corporate governance and sitting on the boards of these things because you have to stay abreast of what's going on. And I learned that the hard way from times where I, you know, co-founded a business with people and said, okay, but I don't even want to be on the board. You guys could deal with all the finance and admin. And that's a big mistake. Yeah, if you're going to found businesses with people, you really have to keep a finger on the pulse of both the finance and admin, even if it's not your department. And this was a problem because those people were supposed to be giving me monthly reports of live, even live access to the accounts to see. Even I don't want to use the accounts, but I want to see the account, you know? And I was being denied access or getting fake reports. And, you know, you just start running into problems. But with this is the problem with the heavily regulated legal business is it's not enough just to be a grower and to set up a business and go, but you have to have a team of lawyers and a team of accountants and a team of finance specialists. And you end up having this huge administrative overhead to make it happen so that even if you think, boy, I could just hire 4 people and do this, you know, breeding project myself, except I need to have all this overhead on top of it to make it all work, you know, because down there, it's not just you get the license and go to work, you get the license. Now you can apply for the quota. And you need to get a quota every time you want to pop a new seed. You got to get a quota. And I'd say, okay, well, I want to plant like a million seeds, right? And they would say, that's crazy. And even if I say, listen, I just want to plant 100,000 seeds. I want to plant 10,000 seeds of these 10 lines. And they would look at us. They would just write back like, you don't need, what are you trying to pull? You don't need to grow 10,000 seeds out. Everybody else just grows like 10 or 20 seeds and makes a selection. And you can do that. And I'm not everybody else. And those people are going to plant their 10, 20 seeds and find a mother and make cuttings. That's great. But that's not what I'm doing here. I'm breeding and I need to use high numbers to really accelerate the process because the more you plant, the better examples you're going to find. And it may be, you know, extremely marginal rate of increase after a while. Like the difference between the one plant from 100 seeds versus 10 seeds might be quite different, but from 10,000 seeds or even 100,000 seeds, they might just be getting a little bit better, you know? But it might find an absolute gem that you just wouldn't have seen if you'd only planted 10 seeds. So you never know. You know, it's like lottery tickets, the seeds in a way. So you know, the more you have, the better chance you have of winning. So I like to look at a high population of seeds to make selections from. And yeah, sure, I can see what it looks like from 20, but I have planted some where the smallest lot I think is acceptable for seed breeding is about 250 because usually any recessive stuff shows up like 1 out of 250. If I have 2 recessives out of 500, that, you know, or 1 out of 250, that seems to be, and you know, from when I've talked to other breeders as well that have said the same thing, said usually you see all the phenos, including the recessives, with about 250 seeds. Okay, but if you plant 25,000, you're going to find a better example of anything in any pheno in there, you know? So it's really important to have the space to grow out nice selection crops and inexpensively. If you had to pay a hydro bill on, you know, 10 acres of warehouse to make those selections indoors, that's just not feasible, you know? Even if you can use the crop for extracts or something, and we can't, we have to burn the whole crop. So it's, you have to be able to do that inexpensively. And under the sun and the rain and the wind is easily the most expensive paradigm when it comes to growing out your seeds, you know. So you're gonna have lots of hands on, but it's, you know, especially if you're keeping records on the plants and you've got barcode scanners and people there with tablets making notes and measurements of all these different plants. So that alone is a lot of work, because it's not that all these people aren't there growing the plants, like physically growing the plants, but they're there tracking them, you know? So that's the breeding station is a little different than a sense production operation. And especially one that's, very accredited, then you have to recognize you're dealing with a different beast. It's not just about the weight or the flavor or the potency, but it's about looking at all the variables and finding winners, picking those winners. That's the fun part.
I've got a good question for you on or I would like to hear your opinion, I guess is a better way to put it. Lately I've been kind of you're laying very good reasons for what I'm saying. And I want to back up a little bit further yet, is to say I'm excited to hear that you're re-releasing or you're working some of your stuff again. And because as you say, you probably are tired of the duplication and the copies and that. And so this is where I'm at, kind of where I'm asking your opinion about is I've been really champion um breeders to keep their stuff proprietary on both sides. Um just because you're standing by something, and it would really eliminate or slow down the kind of the copycat bullshit. It would stop people breeding for just kind of hype, because I think that's what drives a lot of the breeding today is people just trying to chase names so they can put the A and B on their packs as something good ahead. But I think if they would keep it proprietary, it would slow down a lot of the bullshit. It would slow down a lot of the copycat stuff. And by rights, people like yourself that are putting in $100,000 or 100,000 seed selections, you know what I mean? You should have the right to, you know what I mean? That's a lot of work. That's a lot of, you know what I mean? You should be able to protect. And that's the other kind of angle on it too. Right now, you can't necessarily patent a cultivar. So that by keeping it proprietary, it'd be one of the few ways to kind of protect yourself a little bit as things go on. you know Even if somebody would put out something that was close to yours, you could then have it tested to go, okay, let's have yours tested, brother, and see if it matches mine. Oh, it does. Oh, it does. How would you recreate that? Because I've got mom and dad in tissue culture, and I could reproduce it in a minute. You know what I mean? So what are your thoughts on kind of pushing breeders to kind of keep proprietary cultivars, and just putting your strain out by merit? Even after a couple of those, like your work, I think if you put out a strain and kept the lineage proprietary, I think people would go respect your breeding enough to go, let's just try it. He's put out fire all this time. You know what I mean? And so what do you feel about, breeders kind of keeping that under their hat a little bit to kind of protect themselves and their work? You muted. You're muted.
Oops, sorry. I said I'm certainly happy to see more options on the table as far as, plant breeders' rights and that. And it's one thing to have registrations and all that. It's another to enforce them. And whether that's even just named, trademarked and that, right? So that's a big part of it is the names. The other part of it is the genetics. And for me, it's never bothered me if people use the genetics. That's why I put them out there. I'm happy people use them. And for myself, my catalogs were always 100% original. You never saw a knockoff on my catalog, right? So I think it's nice to credit the sources, and that's what I would always do. I would say, this is this, and this is what I call it, and here's what it came from, and I would list the parentage to the best of my knowledge, which was not often perfectly accurate back in the day, let's say, but at the best of my knowledge, here's what the parents were. So to me, that's respectful, and, to the people that came before me, because we all stand on the shoulders of giants, but is also helping people going forward with the accuracy of the chain of custody for this pretty much oral tradition of genetics that's getting passed down, where they came from, and this and that, right? Because it wasn't all easily verifiable. And as far as proprietary genetics, and what I've really always felt about is that I've wanted to do something proprietary, or a few, in that I would be releasing jars of flour or extract, but not releasing the genetics. So that would be, to me, that's proprietary genetics. Once they're out there, they're out there. But if, it's pretty hard to protect that, and not to say you can't, but it's hard. Whereas if you just don't put the genetics out there, now it's proprietary. Nobody else has it. So that's the only way. So if you want to try my, whatever you want to call it, the newest thing, and say, okay, listen, this is my latest and greatest, but I'm not selling the genetics. You can only buy it in a jar. Here's your $20 ounce of it, or whatever, and that's the only way to get that jar is, buy the flour. You're not going to get the seed. You're not going to get the cutting. If you want to try this special pot, this is the only place to get it. Because, and the reason for this is that popularity is the kiss of death. So, and I've talked about this before, but maybe not on your show here, but once everybody's growing it, when it's the new and just the aficionados have it, those guys are really good growers. So, you and your friends are growing epic versions of something all new and tasty. Now I've got to let the dog out. Give me a sec. So
jars on the counter there, full of blood.
So but once those genetics get out there, and the average growers all growing, they grow mids, or less. So the average growers grow average wheat, right? So not everybody grows stellar wheat. So that when only the people growing stellar wheat are checking out the latest and greatest, it gets a great reputation because everybody sees good examples of it. But once the commercial guys get their hands on it, and this is what happened, is we'd have a grapefruit, for example, or sweet tooth come out and be all the rage in Vancouver, and all foreign buyers, that was all they wanted, because they would see these absolutely frosty packs that were purple, green, and fruity, and everybody was stoked, But then you come a year later, and those clones have been sold in every grow store for a year, or 2 years or 3 years. And all the absolute low grade growers that have poor practices and don't even smoke their herb or anything, and it's all the red haired dog shit. And suddenly, what was the exotics before is all of a sudden the regs, and nobody wants it, So you think, yeah, the popularity is the kiss of death for a cultivar, Once it gets too popular, all you see is shit versions of it. And the people that are, trying to do the top end product, they're trying to differentiate now, and they've got to grow something that is not that, just because that name is toxic, and I've seen that happen with lots of things. Like when it was new, everybody wanted, pink kush or whatever. And then once everybody's grown pink, it's like, oh, no more fucking pink kush, right? Like the popularity is the kiss of death, it's pretty funny. If a lot of those ones, if you were still putting out the top grade product of it, it would stand up today with the best of the best. but the average person, the average grower destroyed that name. Like in a way, okay, it's a household name, everybody's heard of it, that's great in a way, but everybody's sick of it because they've seen so many, D-grade versions of it. And even today I see, like, with the Shishkaberry knockoffs you're talking about, I was on some website recently that had seeds. Somebody sent me a link and said, "Are these your seeds?" And it was Shishkaberry seeds on some American website. And it said, "These are our top 10 sellers," or whatever. And this was their number one bestseller was Shishkaberry. And the picture of it even looked really lame. And their description of it was like, "Oh, this came from this knockoff." They were knockoffs of knockoffs of knockoffs of Shishkaberry. It was just such a diluted version that it was sad to see it. But that picture beside the name and think, man, how far it has fallen, But it's, I stepped out. I got sick of the whole thing when it got difficult in Europe, and I just said, it's not worth the hassle right now. And all my customers were selling knockoffs of my seeds while I was selling them the seeds. I'm like, why do I even bother? I fucking go to all this trouble to set up this big breeding station in Switzerland, and you're getting guys to make them in the closet next door in their apartment. I give up, just you want to sell shit seed, but I'm fucking done, so I took a good long break from it. And but I was always happy to get back to it, and I always knew one day I'd get back to it, but I really wanted to do it breeding in the equator and also breeding with plant breeders' rights in some way to protect your work if you're actually going to be doing the actual work and not just producing seeds as fast as you can, which is what most of the new seed companies today, it's really just a constant race to put out the latest untested hype, and that's fine. A million monkeys can come up with Shakespeare and all that, right? I mean, the more people doing it, the better, as far as I'm concerned. I think it's awesome. But, there's a big difference between, stabilizing on seed lines and just crossing shit as fast as you can, So when you put out stable seed, only twice I did it with the Sweet Tooth 3 and Sweet Tooth 4, but you could plant rooms of those and they look like clones. So once you bring that kind of consistency into the game, which you get in any other regular crop, if you're buying corn seed or something and you plant your peaches and cream corn, it looks like a field of peaches and cream corn. It's not like, oh, there's a few purple ones, and it's not. The corn has been very domesticated, right? Whereas cannabis hasn't quite hit that level of domestication yet. In most cases, it has happened with hemp. And in Canada, they're very strict about which hemp you can plant. They got to test it out for 2 years before they even let farmers have it. Whereas it's a little more Wild West in the States. And American hemp seed I've seen it wouldn't pass in Canada, So it's all different everywhere. But so that whole hemp thing is really based on THC phobia, because there's no real reason of 0.3 or 1%. And the people with 0.3 are lobbying to get 1%. Meanwhile, we've got in Colombia, we got 1%. But still, you get a plant that's 1.2 and it's twice as good as your one that's 0.9 and you can't use it. That's ridiculous. It's like it's still 1.2. It's still freaking hemp, just get over it already. The whole THC thing just drives me nuts. Like, who cares if you get cellulose and THC from the same plant? Big deal, You can do that, but it's just these asinine regs that you're always working with one arm tied behind your back, it seems like.
I think you just, without unwittingly, kind of agreed with me in a way, because I really believe by keeping things a little bit proprietary there, you would, eliminate a lot of that, you seeing your strain in other catalogs, because again, they don't necessarily know the recipe. You know what I mean? And I think a good breeder would, just like anytime, like say you would make a cake or anything else, you're wanting to select the best ingredients. So you would necessarily source a good genetic. And I think at some point you would go, hey, this is really good. And I want you to know you're part of the ingredients of this great strain. I
Yeah.
think you would get the tip of the hat there that you're
No,
looking
you know
for,
what?
but
I've
it would
always
slow
wanted to
down.
release stuff for people to use. And I love seeing the derivative stuff. I hate seeing just the flat out knockoffs where they're using your name to sell their seeds because their seeds are not my seeds. Even if you use my seed to make them, there's your seeds are different than mine, you know? It's a different generation. You just don't have the right to use other people's seeds. And we couldn't do anything about that for the longest time. But um, I just felt it was cheesy, you know. I really have a pretty low opinion of the people I see doing that, you know, and
I think
whatever.
I think people would continue to use it like you'd want, and I think you would still continue to get the credibility there, of it going in necessarily. I just don't think you'd see the duplication as much because
Right.
you know what I mean. People would look at it and go, "Well, this isn't Spice of Life. It isn't on the pack, and it only comes from him." So.
You look at how many places have been selling knockoffs of Spice of Life for the last 20 years. Like, I mean, even before, you know, even before I left Vancouver, people were making there was like, you know, several other seed companies just basically just making knockoffs of my catalog. There was probably 3 different ones in Vancouver alone, you know, just within years. Like I was only a few years into it and there was already copycats, you know, and they knew you couldn't do anything about it. So, well, things you could do about it, but those would get me in more trouble than growing grass. So I have not vaporized their homes or businesses, you know. But boy, oh boy, it does piss you off when you see people going, "Oh, I tried that Shishka berry from Barney's, man. It was a Herbie. What is this?" And you're just like, "Oh, you fucker," you know. Like, oh, so many idiots. There was some out here in BC. Some of them were ones that I gave a hand to when they were getting started, and they turn around and that's the thanks you get, you know, where you think no good deed goes unpunished, you know. There was a couple guys that were working at a grow store and they had one clone they were growing. It was called Iggy and it was a Hermie. It was fucking garbage. I was like, why are you growing this? And they kept growing it like a couple of crops. And I said, why are you growing it? Well, we just can't afford to buy new genetics. I said, guys, you know, they were kind of like Dumb and Dumber, these 2 guys. And I just said, guys, give me your address. I'm going to bring you over a tray of all my favorite cuttings, and you're going to kill this Iggy and never grow it again because it's shit, guys. And they're like, oh, that'd be awesome. So I came by, drove, you know, hour across town, brought them a tray of cuttings. And like 4 months later, they'd used all the grapefruit, sweet skunk, everything I give them to make knockoff seeds or the closest they could and sell them as a second label to the outlet I was selling my seeds. And I'm like, you guys both suck. Like the 2 guys I gave the plants to, yes. Like I just helped you you could have been growing pounds and doing a good job here now. And you decide what you're going to do to thank me is start making seeds out of all the plants I gave you and selling them there to the guy. And that guy wasn't paying me and he owed me money and he would buy the seeds from them cheaper their version of them. But whenever they came in and said, oh, we're out of seeds, but we have these ones and we gave them the same plants and everything. You know, so you just get tired of that, you know, and that wasn't even the only example. There was somebody else too. And I just think, I think of 2 other ones there that you went from like hat in hand people looking for a few good cuts to grow to making knockoffs of them in the seed business like in 6 months. And you're just like, you guys suck. Anyways, I'm not, it's so long ago, but it's just so cheesy, you know? Anyway, can you say, I just have a low opinion of these people. And now there's so many, like I don't even know them all anymore. I've always seen so many over the years. But whatever. It's
And
you know, imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, as they say. You know.
I just, well, and I guess I'm looking at it in kind of different reasons. Well, one is I would like to see the growers like yourself be protected, because I think when these bigger corporations come in, that's what they're going to do. They're not necessarily going to tell you that what they're creating. And I think it would take people, I just think it would push other breeders to kind of take their stuff to more of a higher standard. Take it to a little later in the breeding phases, to where there's not so much of a variation in there, but more of, what you created. So they'd be, you know what I mean, a little more time to stand by and breed it a little further on before it's
Well, this
released,
is
and a little
well, that's
less
kind of what
pollen
we're.
chucking.
This was the top thing with Colombia, was the number one opportunity there that most people didn't recognize. The people recognized that it was inexpensive cost of production. That was the number one thing in most people's minds. But they didn't realize it was the first country that added cannabis to the National Registry of Plants. So you couldn't work with it until you characterized it and registered it according to a Linnaean classification system. And it was, so to me, I was like, wow, finally there's somewhere I can register plants. So Colombia was really the first country to make that part of the program. And our company there licenses plants to producers in other places. So those are kind of proprietary genetics that way, where they know we've got a molecular fingerprint of that genetics. So if they're selling that genetic, because they're licensed, they have very stringent reporting requirements and all that, right? So if we know they sell 10 tons of our whatever, and they pay us 5% royalty on the 10 tons. So so licensing the cultivars is the first step. While you're in the genetics business, you can license cultivars faster than you can stabilize a seed line. But each generation gives you an opportunity to find a special cultivar, and you can register that plant for asexual propagation and then license that to producers for royalties. So I like the royalty model of genetics. It's different than selling seeds. If you're selling seeds $2 a pop or whatever, that's a very different business model than doing the paperwork to license a proprietary clone to a licensed producer. And we'll see more of that. Like, that business is growing, and we generally charge a deposit for a down payment, because there's a lot of paperwork involved usually in transferring the genetic material from one continent to another. But literally, we come through with 2 coolers of clones and fresh cut clones, thousands of them. We'd have coolers of fresh cut clones coming from Bogota to Madrid, and then going through the customs and clearing the phytosanitary inspection. They have to clear the phytosanitary inspection in Bogota before they get on the plane. And so they're going through the plants with microscopes and looking for any signs of bugs or signs of viruses or anything. It's really quite a process, and it's quite surreal that we do this now, and have done it more than once. This is getting to be standard, protocol for us. But now that we've got our facility up in Spain, there's partners that we deal with that are licensed producers that we license genetics to. So we used to send those to them directly from Colombia, and then they can reproduce those as well. But whatever they're selling that brand of cannabis, we're getting a royalty on it. But now that we have our own place in the Basque Country, we just need to send our stuff there from Colombia, and then that is a tissue culture facility, and that is where we repackage them, let's say, for producers around Europe. So any European producer can get our tissue cultures from Spain.
It sounds like there's a, I don't think I've ever considered it like that as far as like being able to license them out later on too. It's an interesting viewpoint.
You know, Spain, they got challenging. They had one licensee at one point called Lineo Health. They were the first one quite a long time ago to get a medical cannabis production license there. And then they wanted to close the door behind them. So they're very tight with the Spanish royals, even, let alone the government, but they wanted to close the door behind them. So they said, anybody that wants to get a license after us has to buy genetics from a registered source. And at the time, there was really no registered sources. So they were going to have to get them from them, was their thinking, you know? And what ended up happening was Colombia became a registered source, you know, long after the fact. And then that was the first place that the Spaniards could, they had to put on their application. If you want to put an application to be a medical grower in Spain, you have to state the source of registered genetics on your license application. So we charged like, I can't remember, I think it's 50,000 euros for that letter. Maybe it was 25,000 euros. I can't remember. We charge a lot for that letter because we've been used numerous times as a supplier of licensed genetics. So we help them with that letter to get their license, and then they're contracted to get their genetics from us. It's part of their license requirement that they get the genetics from us because we're a respected source, and they can then they can go into production. So it's really neat to see all these plants that I've selected out of the field of the equator. Some of them I know this is useless for the equator, but this would be beautiful on a table in a greenhouse somewhere, you know? So I spot the ones for, they'll have a different use, you know, like they're not all, I know when I'm doing selections, I'm not just looking for things that work there. I'm looking for things that will work in other places too. So I'll do some selection rounds where I'll have cuttings of everything in the field, but have it flowered on tables and pots under roofs so it never gets rained on, you know, so I can have a look at them in a horticultural setting versus an agricultural setting, you know. And it's just the brilliant thing to me is always going to be making selections from fields grown from seed. I absolutely love to do that, especially if we've made the hybrids going into it and you have all these different lines all spread out through the different fields. I never get tired of looking at those plants. I mean, I can walk up and down those rows and just spend all day in it. And the weather might be too hot, you know, it might be brutal. And you don't want to even be out there at noon, you know, but you still, I was like, oh, I'm only here for 3 weeks and I've got, you know, so many thousands of plants to look at. And then I go into the lab and there's dried samples of them stacked on, literally stacked on those trays, like little harvest trays and that. They'll be stacked up to the roof, you know, and just bag after bag after bag of numbered samples from everything, all the different selections. We've got our own in-house analytical laboratory with the new Shimadzu setup, which isn't the top lab gear you can get, but it's really, really good for in-house. I mean, it's you know, it's real equipment. So it's fun to go in and have all these tools that we didn't have in the past. And then as far as mailing out samples to be sequenced elsewhere, that's not something we do in-house. But there's just so much to coordinate to be able to do this under a heavily regulated environment that it does suck the life out of it a bit. But at the end of the day, as long as I can walk in my fields and make selections, it's like an itch is scratched, you know. I feel like I gotta do it, you know. You know, it just feels like a relief. I'm literally compelled to do this, despite the overwhelming odds stacked against me going down there and starting that business. It is, a story unto itself, and it's been half dream and half nightmare, and but now it's, I think, back fully onto the dream phase again. I think the nightmare is over. I do believe the nightmare is over, but there was years of real pain there, that's for sure. But anyways, it's going good now, and I'm happy to still see it growing. There's a lot of people involved now. It's blowing my mind.
Yeah, you look 10 years younger from the last time I spoke with you.
I'm not. I'm definitely not.
Well, you look it. And that must be reflecting the happiness, you know what I mean? Positiveness and what you're doing,
I
I
probably
think.
just got a better tan from you at the end of the summer. Not even much. So I've been inside the last little while. I've got a beard. I don't think I had a beard last time I talked to you.
Oh, you did. So, selection's done outdoors, but what about pollination? Is that something that you do indoors, or is that an
Yeah, we
outdoor?
have pollination rooms for, making all the test runs or small batches, like a kilo room kind of thing. But I totally want to make like 10-hectare pollinations outdoors, because when I grow scents there, it's scents. There's no neighbors growing around me. So there's never stray pollen from neighbors or anything. So I'm confident that I can make field seed there. And you have to, if you want to do it on a scale like hemp, and you using a seed drill to plant 100 seeds a square meter and grow high density plantings with no branches, just a whole lot of matchstick plants, like just sea of green. And that's how I intend to grow most of the production crops. I want to grow them high density. I'm not going to grow trees. I'm not going to have branches. They are going to be like fields of wheat, and that's totally how I'm going to plant these when I hit the paradigm I set out to. That is my raison d'etre.
Well, you've got a good backup plan already in play there. I mean, even once you make that step to where you're doing the outdoor pollination, you could offer up a table out front of, the sterile females. Just be like, here you go, everybody around me. I'm handing out free clones of the sterile girls.
Oh yeah,
Problem
there's nobody
solved.
growing anywhere
I'll
near.
be I'll be throwing pollen like crazy.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I'd have to put an ad out locally, like, you're gonna be some Poland right now. But no, I'm not worried about it. There's nothing but cows around us for a long way. Well, cattle, let's say. There's a lot of cattle and not a lot of people, and nobody growing weed really until probably gotta go 15 clicks or something until somebody might have a plant in their backyard. So I mean that they're not going to get heavily seeded, if any. They're pretty far. I know pollen can travel a super long way, but it's just really dilute by the time it gets there. Like when I was in Spain, the pollen count in the news, like on the weather report, the pollen count would be like 80% of the pollen in Spain right now in August was from Morocco. It's all cannabis pollen from Morocco. They have these huge fields in the Rift Mountains, right? But you'd have plants there that were still scents. It wasn't just because there was pollen in the air. It didn't mean that all your pot was seeded. It wasn't dense enough pollen that you'd notice any seeds. Somebody might find a seed, but that's a little further away. But still, I'm not worried about putting out a field of pollen there, because I just know I know my neighbors. They're not growing weed there. It's okay. And even without 10 hectares, 10 hectares is like 25 acres, right? I have 11 hectares of field space that's not greenhouse or reservoir drying facilities. I have 24 hectares fenced, where everything happens inside that 24 hectares for psychoactive. So that's like 60 acres fenced and has armed security 24 hours. But that includes a 1.5 hectare reservoir. It includes greenhouses, it includes hybridization rooms, workers' quarters, workers' staff, or staff, the lunch place, change rooms, storage bodegas, labs, for extraction, clone facility. Like there's all this stuff in there. So of open field space, there's 11 hectares. And a hectare is like 2.5 acres. So there's over 25 acres, 27.5 acres that I can do one pollination at a time. So even if I had 10 different females I really liked, or 6 different females that maybe only work there in the dry season, I can do one large pollination. And on a few hectares, I can make 100 million fem seeds. So if I make 100 million fem seeds 3 times a year, make 3 crops of those, and they could be different pollinations. Maybe it's 5 females and 1 pollen parent. So you'd have, say, 15 different lines come out and 20 million seeds of each one, right? So if you did 5 per pollination if you were doing 100 million seed pollinations. So that's sort of my batch goal for production, is to have us make 100 million seed lots a couple times a year, a few times a year. And that'll keep our seed catalog in really good shape, and I want to have these seeds out very mainstream distribution, like at gas stations and stuff, on little display racks, and late night TV ads, the infomercials. You can't sleep, grow some of our wheat. So we're gonna blitz these seeds out there, and they are gonna be cheap like borscht. I just want to really flip the whole place up on its head and bring out quality seed that, especially stuff that's worked stable enough that I can sell it to a farmer and say, you can plant these instead of clones. You really won't have a problem. They're going to be really, really uniform. People want to see that. If you're planting corn from clones, everybody would think you were crazy. And even hemp, most people are growing hemp from seed, right? It's not that it's not normal to grow crops from seed. It is normal to grow crops from seed. It's less common to do things asexually. So I really would like to see some, really dynamite seed come out that's absolutely stable enough to use in lieu of clones, and also so abundant that you can afford to use them cheaper than clones. That there's, right now people go, oh, I can't even if I wanted to plant those seeds, they're $20 a seed or $25 a seed. They're not going to grow a crop from those, especially a sea green one, But if they start to go, okay, well, they're 50 cents a seed, they're cheaper than clones, they don't take very long. And if they come up and they all look exactly the same, who cares, So I think that's going to be a real big change in production over the next 5 years. Like, I don't think you're going to see it overnight, but I think it's going to take, in roughly 5 years, I think a lot more people will be growing crops from seed and saving all of the space that they spend on mothers and clones right now can go into flowering space. There really is a quarter of every operation is wasted space that way. You're still going to need some veg space to get those seeds started. But in 2 weeks after you started them, they're already bigger than a clone would have been if you'd cut it and had to root it. They can take off in 2 weeks, right? So the clone is just recovering from rooting in 2 weeks. So the seed can take right off, and the seeds grow so vigorously. There's not that shock that clones have. I'm always going to need clones. I'm always going to use clones. They're part of the gene bank and library and breeding. They're useful. But if I was just straight up farming for weight, I would really want to use stable seeds because it's just so much easier. if you want to go away for the winter, you don't have to worry about your mothers and all that. Whereas if you've got to have enough clones ready to plant your fields, you've got to be growing mothers and making clones all winter. Whereas if you've just got a freezer full of seed that you trust and you know is stable, you think I can go out and replant my greenhouse. It's going to look exactly the same every crop with these seeds. So I really obviously am a big fan of seeds. So I want to make the best seeds I can. It's one of the reasons I haven't rushed out releasing the first things I could. I really want to take time to make sure that when I do bring out new releases, that they're things people are genuinely excited about, with merit. So I think the artificial seeds are going to be the way we distribute the sterile plants. So those will be the format for the sterile plants, and most of those will come from Spain. We're working on automating the process in suspension culture. That's what we need DU funding for. And the seeds, though, just feminized seeds, those are going to hit the US market. We'll be importing them there. The first one that we're doing in volume is just one straight line. It's a 1-to-1. It gives you basically 10 to 10 or 15 to 15 with THC CBD. And that 1-to-1 I want to see on late night TV ads. Is they're federally legal for people to order those seeds across the country. And we may just be selling them 5 seed packs for $5 a pack. Order now and receive these Ginsu steak knives. I don't know. We're gonna have some fun with it though. Maybe not the steak knives on $5 packs, but you might have to get a little more than a $5 pack to get the steak knives. They can't promise.
Why steak knives?
Steak knives. I'm not promising steak knives.
It's a good thing though, man. I do. I appreciate you, the way you think big. I think that's where a lot of people necessarily go wrong. They come up with an idea, but they don't necessarily tend to push it forward or continue to see it. But you have to dream big. You have to,
you have to
you
persist
have to
at it. You have to be bloody crazy because you have to take on delusional things where everybody says, that's fucking mental. Nobody can do that. And then you have to go and do that, And the more people that tell you that's crazy, you'll never do that. That just pushes you, So I absolutely revel in, doing these things. People say you can't do it. That's just like throwing down the glove, right? It's like, okay, let's figure this out. You laid the gauntlet down. You don't think I can do it? I gotta do it. So I'll try. I keep trying. I've watched much bigger outfits, public companies from Canada come down and turn around with their tails between their legs after 2 years, if they even made it 2 years, because it's not fucking easy down there to get started, let me tell you. And people with a lot deeper pockets bailed out, but we've persevered and really have it going on. So I absolutely vindicated actually in the current operations. I feel pretty stoked about. I think we've got to have about 80 people in the company now, between Colombia, 1 in Peru, and half a dozen in Spain, at least now. It's just gotten crazy. I think it's just more people than I would want if it was just a seed company, but it has to be a lot more than a seed company. We've got doctors working on setting up the formulations for the preclinical trials. And so there's like medical department, right? There's genetics department, extraction department, production department, marketing departments, big legal departments, accounting department, finance department. So there's all these, we've got a very experienced CEO, not from cannabis, no experience in cannabis, but a lot of experience in other industries. So the company's being run in a very corporate manner, which is a shock to my system because I've never, worked in any multinational corporations really, I had no experience working at Samsung or Unilever, Philip Morris, or, big companies like this. Whereas I've got executive staff that have these, kind of backgrounds, which is very useful for a lot of the fact that we're dealing with overblown regulations and schmoozing government is how a lot of these things happen, So I could, I'm not really interested in rubbing elbows in the halls of power to get what we need done. I want to be in the field with my plants, So I put on the suit and I've gone to the Congress and I've gone to all kinds of ministries and meetings, but I really minimize my exposure to that end of the business. And I've done it in the past and I haven't done it in a long time. But I'm confident to do it. It's not a problem. And if I hadn't done it, I might not be where I am with it today. So there's a learning curve though, because it's the whole corporate and bureaucracy is not my world, that's not my world. But if you know what they say, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So I always keep that in the back of my mind. It's like, hey, I may not want to sit in the boardroom, but if I'm not in the boardroom, I'm on the menu. So I always remember that. But if everybody bitches. I've heard a million legacy people talk about how they've been screwed over, and I've been there too. With helping various places get set up. And they say, "Oh, can you bring the genetics over now? We're just about to do our declaration," and then they screw you afterwards if you hadn't got the paperwork all up front. I mean, I've been taken advantage of for being too trusting too, so I know how this goes. But it's really, really common story for legacy people to get the runaround from people that come in from more finance backgrounds typically, and they're all coming in to set up a quick pump and dump play or whatever, but they need genetics or they need a grower to get them set up or an extractor to get them set up. And as soon as they get set up and there's somebody trained there that's working for a small wage, they want to get rid of the original people that were at a higher wage, So if they've got assistant growers at 60 grand and the head grower was 120, as soon as they can get rid of that head grower and just keep the other guy for 60, they will, So I've seen it happen too much, So a lot of people feel like they get the raw end of the deal, and in a lot of cases have. But part of that is that none of them want to make the leap to getting their heads around corporate governance and taking an active role in the corporate structure, because inevitably these highly regulated industries end up being very corporate because there's so much compliance involved and it's so expensive to operate. If you're not on top of it, it'll get away from you. So you've got to have people that have these skills, and these skill sets are very important. And it's not just growing weed and selling it at the farmers market. If you're trying to get stuff registered in different health ministries in different countries or different agriculture ministries in different countries, it's a different ballgame, and you're going to need a strong legal team. Like, I can't even tell you how many lawyers we employ. We have quite a few in-house, and to be fair, in Colombia, they're not super expensive lawyers, but we have them in Spain as well. But we have quite a few in-house in various departments, and then we also have outsourced ones that we work with for more specific things. But I was amazed one time, and this was 3 or 4 years ago, I said, how many lawyers are we dealing with right now? And we went through it. We had 20 lawyers. We got more lawyers than breeders, you know what I mean? We need 20 lawyers and 2 breeders. Oh, God. is possibly this stupid, you know? But that's why Thailand has been such a, a breath of fresh air with the descheduling. And now I don't need to get a quota every time I want to plant a row of seeds. I can just keep putting out rows of seeds until I run out of seeds, you know? That's all there is to it. And that makes it doable, you know? But I just couldn't do it forever without, with the regulations I've been dealing with. Colombia is going to soften up. They've got a new government now, new president, and they're going to do adult use. They've had the second reading approved in the last week, which is the first time that's happened. They've had first readings where it was proposed and shot down. This one passed the second in the Congress. So I think now it might go to the Senate, and we will see. They should have adult use in Colombia with any luck. You know, that'll be a nice improvement, because even though medical's been technically legal there for a while and personal use has been fine for a long time, it's in the Constitution. You can have 20 plants. That's pretty cool. But if you were a medical patient in Colombia, they were really a pain in the ass. Like, you couldn't pick out any off-the-shelf products. You had to get like either drops or cream, I think. Here, maybe your options, like drops or topicals. And they had to be formula magistrale, which means the pharmacist had to blend it for your prescription. So if the doctor said you needed to take 4 milligrams of THC every 8 hours, then the pharmacist would prepare it so that your drops were whatever they were, so that you'd get to take this many drops to get your 4 milligrams every 8 hours. But you couldn't just buy a package of drops, you know? So they just made it more complicated than it needed to be. And that did not serve the patients well, nor the producers, you know? It didn't work for anybody, let's put it that way. So now they're going to have a whole new thing. And they're talking about legalizing all of the drugs there and taxing them. So it could be very interesting very quickly. But yeah, it's a wild place anyway. I really have a lot of high hopes for the country going forward, because they've had such a long civil war, and now it's really does seem to be over now. And people, there's an element of hope and positivity that is really at an all-time high, as far as I can tell. You know, for most people in their lifetime, they've never been as hopeful for the future of Colombia as they are now. So it's really an amazing time to see the tensions dissolving there, you know, because there's been so much problems. And it's not like all the problems will disappear overnight, but the overall, you know, combativeness of the place is greatly diminishing, and that's great to see. So really hope the peace can stick around. Be nice.
Really does take a team to do all that stuff, you know, and move forward. And you know, you've got to leave room, know when to delegate them the responsibility, so you can, you know, concentrate on the stuff that you're concentrating on. Just alone, I would think all them quota papers would put a huge dent in your day if you had to fill out 100,000 quota reports.
I have like 3 people that work on quota applications.
Man.
It's just permission to plant every time you need to plant something. It's crazy. You know, there are PhD breeders that are asking for quotas. If they were breeding tomatoes or corn or anything else, they wouldn't have to do that, you know. But because it's cannabis with THC in it, they have to do that. And then we also, those get submitted via regulatory affairs lawyers that review them as well. So it's crazy. It really is ridiculously overkill, you know. But and I knew it was, I said, well, fuck, it's gonna start out hard, but they're gonna see that it's not, you know, the sky is not falling, and it'll gradually come down. And it has. And we've, you know, worked to do that, you know, either associations, but also us directly. We've you know, because we were the first ones to register genetics. So we were the first ones to get a license to export THC distillate, you know. So we were working to educate these regulators from the beginning. So we've worked with them on it. We got the first quotas, you know, so we, hey guys, you know, maybe we don't need to stress about these quotas, you know, let's, you know, you can see we're doing research. We've been doing these research crops for 5 years. Please don't make us waste time. You know, it just doesn't help anybody. You know, when you have a 6-figure monthly burn rate, if you got to wait 3 months between planting for a fucking signature, you're not really happy about that, you know. So the end of those quotas, I call them los malditos cupos, the damn quotas. When those things are done, I'll be so happy because there's no other country in the world makes you do them. It's just the most asinine thing. You know, most countries, they license your space, and we have a licensed space, but even within the licensed space, in most places, you have to keep good track of your seed to sale, your inventory tracking, and all that. That's fine. But if you have to wait and ask permission every time you got to plant a table full of something, you know, I need to make more mothers of this or whatever. Oh my God, now I've got to fill out an application and have it reviewed by lawyers and have all this done. It just hurts my head. But so we've come to understanding with them, and they've lightened the requirements, like as far as mothers, because before, like, you had to do it all within a calendar year. So your quota expired like December 31st. So you couldn't have a crop that started in November that wasn't done till January because that wasn't in the quotas. It had to be done by December 31st. And you're like, that's not how the seasons work here, you know? Like the quota, the people that made this up, they are not people that are in touch with the seasons on the farm, you know? They're just calling it a calendar year. You got to use up these plants, and then you got to apply again January 1st for your new mother plants. Like, come on, are you joking? Like, it's just so stupid. You just want to go up there and start slapping people. So eventually I just said, I can't talk to these people anymore. You know, here's what I need you to say. And I send somebody more diplomatic with my message, you know. You can get across this point that we need to work, and they're in our way, you know. Anyway.
So as you delegate those responsibilities, have you ever used the line that you have pressing issues to take care of, pressing issues, and then you're in there pressing out some rosin to sample?
Well, we could try that. We could try that. No, it's beyond me. You know, I always tell people, I say, listen, I wasn't always an anarchist. The government made me this way. It's true. I really don't have time for them. I tolerate their existence, and they tolerate mine existence on some level. And that seems to be about the best we'll get. But certainly I have people around me that are more supportive of the, you know, state program, and they enable me to work essentially, because if it came to me having to have patience with the bureaucrat, honestly, I would just be out in the back 40 doing it the old fashioned way and just say, you know, if you want to shoot me, but I'm not dying death by 1,000 paper cuts with your stupid rules and taxes. So, you know, but on the other hand, I don't want to get shot over having a test field of flowers. So I'm pretty happy to be able to do it legally, as much as it's a pain in the ass. You know, it's kind of like the old adage where you say, despite the cost of living, it remains popular. So it's kind of like that. Anyways, you have a great night. I know it's late and we've been rambling on. I've been rambling on.
We love the rambles, and thank you for your time. As we can hear, you are a very, very busy man, but we definitely appreciate the time you give us. That's for sure. And hopefully we can do this again real soon, or sometime soon anyway. It's always a pleasure. Uh, just a couple of quick reminders there. I know we've been over this a couple of times, but it is what it is. The Zoom link that I sent you is always good. Anytime you want to come hang out in the weed nerd world, please come hang out. But just extending that offer. The last thing I'd like to get from you, of course, is that silly soundbite. Hopefully, you kind of remember how it goes. My version thereof would be, "Hey, this is Eagle, and I'm on fucking talking shit with Eagle, episode 732. Remind him which one it is. I would be more than grateful, and I am ready right now, my friend."
Okay. I just click something here. I'm Breeder Steve, and I'm on fucking talking shit with Eagle, episode 732.
Perfect.
Thanks for watching.
Ah,
Have a great
thank you,
night.
my friend.
Yeah,
Uh,
you
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
all
And
right.
good luck on your endeavors, both in Colombia and in Thailand and BC there. And hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Super. Have a great night, man.
You too. Well,
Thanks.
for the rest of you guys, thank you for tuning in. Always appreciate your guys' time as well. Don't forget to do something nice for somebody. Random acts of kindness do save lives. And with that being said, I will see you again soon. Well, impossible wormhole, possible worm or wormhole, possible weed nerd world. Put your thoughts in chat. With that being said, I will see you guys. Thank you for tuning in.